Hello everyone! As all booktubers must, I have to regularly put out a top 10 series list, even though I'm not regularly putting out videos at all, but don't question it. I have been waiting to do this because for a long time, my ongoing top 10 in my head was too similar to my previous top 10 that was in a video. But fortunately, I finally gotten to the point where I can do this and just not have it be a rehash of the 2021 version with 2 changes. I originally was gonna just do an updated version of the same video, completed series, incompleted series, all together in one top 10, but then 3 things occurred to me and changed my mind. Firstly, I've read so many good series that even my 15th favorite series at this point is really, really good, in my opinion, and one I want to talk about. I wrote down the all-inclusive top 10, on a Google Doc, and there were some tough cuts that I did not want to do. Secondly, there are a lot of series in my list where if I have incomplete and complete on the same series, I just didn't know how to rank them, and I went back and forth, and then I realized that if I just split them, I just don't have to make difficult decisions, and then yes, I don't have to make difficult decisions, which is great. And finally, and arguably most importantly, this means I can put up more ranking videos, and ranking videos get views. Let's go! So, let's do a teaser video first, which, considering how unproductive I've been, means the real one could take a year, but who knows. Incomplete series only first. So this one's going to be a top 5, because when I was just making the list, and the drop-off between 5 and 6 was, actually pretty big. So normally there's an honorable mentions where it's this was super tough cuts, and that would have been the case if it was a top 10. But in all honesty, if it's an incomplete series that I've read up to but not finished, then it wasn't that close to 5. Sorry. On this list, I theoretically would count any series that is complete but I am not caught up on. However, in practice, I am caught up on every single one of these series, and it's just the final book isn't out. And for every single series on here, I am not counting complementary novellas or complementary short story collections. And also, finally, as always, this is not an attempt at me making a literary evaluation based on authorial skill or objective quality. This is just my favorite incomplete book series. The 5 series which are not complete that I have gotten the most enjoyment of. Now, I have tried to quantify my enjoyment in a few ways, but note that it's quantifying my enjoyment and not my judgment of the objective quality and authorial skill, because that's what I'm ranking. Feel free to tell me if you enjoyed one of these series more or less. Love to see the comment. If you like this series even more, you liked it less, great. Just please don't tell me I'm wrong for how much I enjoyed something, or that it's ridiculous. If you're gonna comment how could you possibly put this, that, comment something else, or don't comment at all. I don't care. When it comes to how I quantified things, I've taken advantage of my sociopathic need to use decimal places in the rating of every book I read, and I've calculated the mean, median, max, minimum, quarter 2, and quarter 3 for all these series like an absolutely insane person. And then, like an even more insane person, I gave all the series grades for action, plot, character, prose, theme, and world, and then weighed them all differently, and then calculated a GPA for those series, which is a completely normal thing to do. And then I just kind of looked at those in aggregate and judged them based on my gut, because that's absolutely consistent with everything else that's going on. Yeah, that's right. I then didn't even use a formula for all the results. I just kind of they were just to help me think and explain things. So using all of this, we can see what my average enjoyment was for the series. My enjoyment for the average book in the series, which is not the same. How every series does is a pretty good entry. How every series does a meh entry, the worst entry, and the best entry. Now, I've looked at these before, and if you look at my last top 10, I just would have it in the top left corner, max, min, mean, whatever. And it often frustrates me, because I see series that I know in my soul I like more, and they come out with pretty low average scores, and I justify it by being yeah, but look, the max score is a little little bit higher than the max score of this series that has a way higher average, and it always feels very ad hoc, like I'm just coming up with a justification in hindsight, because it is ad hoc, and I am just coming up with a justification in hindsight. And, you know, for one series, I'm like, the quality of the absolute best novel just outweighs everything else, and then in the next, it has very little bearing. So this is why I also quantified, like, the individual skills with, like, the report card type thing, which is, you know, characters, plotting, prose, setting, theme, and action, and each has a letter grade, and then the GPA is calculated with credits. Like, I assign credits, and it's based on what they're worth in my Versus videos. So you can see characters worth 10, plot is 5, prose, theme, and setting are 3, and then action is 1. Comparison, here's the exact same grades, but like everything is just worth 4, and you can see how different the results are. And if I just make everything worth 4, that ends up being very silly, because then, you know, a book with amazing characters and like mid action is the same as a book with mid characters and amazing action, which just isn't how that works. And the result made me happy. The series where I feel like how much I enjoy them is very underrated by going for the book scores, tended to get a pretty large boost. And the series that had like super sky high book by book scores, but I felt really uncomfortable putting as high as they should, tended to fall back to earth. And so generally it made me feel a lot better about my list and the justification for it. So without any more preface, let's get into my 5th favorite incomplete series. Number 5 on this list lives in ambiguity. It is either the greatest victim of recency bias, unfairly held down behind clearly inferior series, or it is a series that I just factually enjoy less than many others do, whose flaws and quirks drive me to frustration and boredom more than they logically should, holding it back from being an all-time favorite, despite truly incredible highs. It is possible that over the years, I have talked too much to people about its strengths, and I have glossed over its weaknesses. It is possible that the me of 6 years ago and the me of today would actually be in total agreement if I were to read it again, that I would not find the writing style immersive, that I would find many POVs in later books frustrating. I suspect otherwise, though. While me from 6 years ago has similarities to me now, he was also a very, very different reader. I don't think myself from 6 years ago would enjoy Robin Hobb, Guy Gavriel, or Ken Liu nearly as much as I do now. So it seems foolish to assume that there aren't series I read back then which I would like more if I read now. And this series, A Song of Ice and Fire, seems to be the prime candidate for me. The series is, of course, one of the most influential and successful book series ever written. I have read this series twice, but it was at the age of 14, which yes, I know is pretty young to read A Song of Ice and Fire, and 17. My memories of this series are foggy, as the image of my imagination fights with the clear image given to me through the show, and my memories of 2/3 of the last 2 books basically fades into non-existence, and I wonder how much I actually remember from these books, and how much I remember because, as in like remembering the reading experience and reading it. I remember a few scenes, but I wonder how much I remember because I know what happens in the show, and I also know a lot of what's different in the show and in the books from people talking about the books and the show. There are individual scenes that stand out in my mind that basically prevent me from gaslighting myself into thinking that like I didn't actually read them or basically just like skim them and then just like watch the show. But I have to think that even if I couldn't have told you at the time why George R. R. Martin was particularly skilled at creating characters, that the young me still felt the effect of that skill, and that is why I enjoyed the series to the degree I did. Often I have reread series that were staples of my younger years, and I found that I love them just as much or even more. I am just more aware of what differentiates them from the pack. With this series, I really hope to love them more when I do eventually reread them, and also I hope I can identify what stopped me from loving them more in the past, as well as obviously being able to better justify in my head why I love them more now. So my ratings for this series are extremely confused. If you look at my book-by-book ratings, I kind of have curved the past and the future, giving them a score that doesn't really affect how much I enjoyed the book when I last read them, and it also doesn't really reflect my opinion on their quality, because while going all the way in either direction, like either giving them the rating of how good I think they are, or giving them the rating of how much I enjoyed them when I read them at 17, feels more principle and concepts, I'm just not comfortable with the result. Like, either way, when I look at the rating, I'm like, no, I'm not giving the book that score. I'm not going to give A Storm of Swords a 9.8 out of 10 without rereading it again and deciding that I enjoy it as much as other books I gave a 9.8 out of 10, but I'm also not going to give it like a 9.2 or like a 9 out of 10, because it's just like clearly better than the books I gave that score. So we're going to move on. Let's have a look at George's results according to the numbers for my enjoyment. When I look at the numbers, I have given George a GPA of 3.88, which for those of you who are in school knows a pretty damn good GPA, because he did pretty damn well on the report cards. I didn't give him any grades worse than a B, and he picked up A's in character, plotting, setting, and theme. This is actually the 5th highest GPA of any series in the complete or complete series list, and we'll see if this is me glossing over the flaws that have died in the fog of my memory, or if this is a reflection of what I will think about the series coming to it from a new perspective, and it actually just will be one of my favorite series. The book scores for this series are a complete mess, as I discussed before. It's a mix of how I felt 6 years ago and how I think I would feel now. A Storm of Swords gives A Song of Ice and Fire a max of 9.4, which is already a very high max score, but feels absurdly low for what is uncontroversially one of the best fantasy books ever written. But he ends up with a median of 9, a quarter 3 or a 75th percentile, meaning better than 75% of the other books, of 9.2, which doesn't feel like it matches my enjoyment of the series for how high it is, but also having it lower feels weird as well. Overall, this was the hardest series to place. I feel like it's better than a bunch of series I have above it, and I feel like I enjoyed reading it less than a bunch of series below it, but I read it a long time ago. Overall, though, when it comes to describing my opinion, I'm reasonably happy with having A Song of Ice and Fire at the number 5 spot on this list. And the next one is the other series that was kind of hard to place. The top 3 were really easy, but the next series is hard to place for completely different reasons. It's a series that many would argue is not on the same level as the other series on this top 5 list, but it's also a series where the books just completely took over my life when I was reading them. What is the most painful day of your life? Can you remember it? Better yet, can you picture it? If you were successful, you might notice that you are not currently lying on the ground screaming in pain, which of course you would be if you actually could imagine the most painful moment of your life as it really was, because obviously the memory of a feeling is much weaker than the actual feeling, an echo. The same problem comes again while trying to remember book series. On ranking a series I read many months ago, reading is inherently an emotional experience, and the reason I enjoy books is that they emotionally connect to me. So while I can be aware of how much I loved reading The Rage of Dragons and The Fires of Vengeance by Evan Winter, as the weeks and months go by, and I see other people say, it isn't as good as, other better books, or that Evan Winter is clearly a much less skilled author than basically everyone else I have on either of these lists, that begins to color my memories and introduce doubt as to whether it is as vivid as I remember. Ultimately, I have decided to trust myself. I stayed up until 7 a.m. finishing The Rage of Dragons, and it had me obsessed for months after, rereading it shortly before the sequel, The Fires of Vengeance, came out, which I also read in one sitting. Ultimately, I lowered The Rage of Dragons score from 9.5 to 9.3, and as I talk about it now, I wonder if I regret that. Why should I trust the memory of reading a novel more than the actual experience of reading the novel? However, the main reason I did that is, in hindsight, I felt like The Fires of Vengeance is the better novel in basically every way. If I were to give both a report card, it would get a higher score in every single category that I have here. And I gave it a lower score than 9.5. I gave it a 9.4. But still, I wonder, looking at each aspect individually is not actually how we judge books. It's how we explain and justify why we loved or didn't love a book. And at the time of reading, when the emotions and memories were fresh, I certainly liked The Rage of Dragons a little bit more. However, I would rank them amongst themselves, and despite what I sometimes trick myself into thinking when others talk about them, I love these two novels. Not only are they paced incredibly, and the action is tense and thrilling, which I think is the uncontroversial things they're good at, but I love Tao as a protagonist. I think the way Evan Winter chooses to switch POVs to tell a story centered around one man while acknowledging the lives of others is brilliant. With one POV switch in Fires of Vengeance, he turns what would have been a slightly cliche revenge scene into like the best chapter of both novels, which pulled on the strings of my heart and left me questions after closing the book. The start of The Rage of Dragons had me hooked instantly. Tao was relatable and I felt the rage he did and I needed his vengeance. I thirsted for it. Many, many, many authors have written about the new warrior going into their first battle, and Evan Winter just twisted it in a way that I have not seen before or since. And it's just the details that make this book. Furthermore, just the world and situation, like on a macro scale, is just so interesting and, in my opinion, unique. Because it's both aesthetically unfamiliar while also just being badass. It's one society holding the fucking line for centuries.
We will hold the line!
It does this while also raising serious moral questions and ambiguity. The friendships were fantastic. He showed how people with totally different motivations can fight with each other while still being friends who would go together to the end of the world. And when some friends are lost, I truly feel it. The way magic is used in this series is genius, with the consequences of its use being completely inseparable from the plot and character and themes. This series was not outlined story-wise, and then, let's add magic as an afterthought. It adds wonder, it adds creative problem-solving, and enriches the story and characters, and is tied into the narrative in a way that very, very few fantasy novels have done. So why is this series fourth? Have I just gaslighted myself into thinking I like this less than I do, and it actually should be like, it's probably not second, but like third? I guess score-wise it looks like second. Have I slowly been pushed back over time by people insinuating that this is the novel that I and others loved because of bias going into it? That's right, the novel that I barely talked about with people I knew before reading it and essentially had no expectations for, which I read while I had no channel, and it's a novel that if I'd given 1 or 2 stars to, basically no one would care. This is the novel that I've heard I and others loved because of outside conditions. Not novels by, say, J.R.R. Tolkien, or Terry Pratchett, or Steven Erikson. I'm not saying these people aren't brilliant, just that if there was a series where it would be understandable to credit outside conditions for people loving it, these seem a lot more likely. Or for others, Brandon or George R. R. Martin, but I read those before I really talked to people online about books. But no, it's The Burning, where, not series where I know that I will have people pushing back on any criticisms that I make, and, some where people will actually just, think less of me if I don't like the novels. No, it isn't those series where I was biased going in, or others. It's this one. This is the series where people loved it because of outside expectations. Honestly, maybe hearing that this is not actually that good and having people commented on it when I include Evan Winter as one of, my favorite authors has pushed me back a little bit. Maybe in reality, where I think there's a good chance that in a reality where I was just, stuck on an island with no internet when I'd read all of these books, that I would actually have this series higher. I can't know that for sure, but, I'm pretty damn confident the island reality version of me wouldn't have it low. So, after that entire thing, why isn't this higher? Why is this 4? Well, the reason is, even though I love both these books, I don't know there. Those books, wholeheartedly, it just felt weird putting it higher than any series above it. I kinda sorta considered putting it third, but I actually feel weird putting it above A Song of Ice and Fire. I just feel more weird putting it below A Song of Ice and Fire, because I actually just, enjoyed reading it a lot more. But for the series above it, I felt more weird putting it above it than I did below it. Although I still feel weird a little bit putting below it, because like the average score is quite a bit higher. This is an average novel score of 9.35, which is one of the highest average novel scores of like any of the series. The only ones that are higher are things like Stormlight. But this is one of the series when I looked at then the individual characteristics, it kind of brought it down to where I thought it should be. Because GPA-wise, they just don't stand out compared to the others. I gave it a GPA of 3.156, which is the second lowest of any series where I calculated it. So the second lowest of any of my 5 favorite incomplete series or 10 favorite complete series. But despite that, I just still love both books, because sometimes things are greater than the sum of their parts. And maybe sometimes it's hard to quantify or explain what made you love a book or a series of books. And I do think the series above it are slightly better. And ultimately, I just felt more comfortable putting them higher. But this video has started with the series with the most potential for movement on reread. If I reread this series and read book 3 and they get the same score again, then screw the haters, it's moving up. Imagine a series that goes so hard that I can start by telling you that the protagonist blows up a sun, killing billions of people and the current emperor in the process, and basically driving a species into extinction. That may sound like I just spoiled a massive moment from deep in the series, but it is in fact page 1 of book 1, Light. That series is, of course, The Sun Eater by Christopher Ruocchio, which takes up the number 3 spot on my top ongoing series list. The Sun Eater is not a story of a callous man who destroys a sun out of cruelty, but a story of an old man who tells the story of how a decent young man could end up committing one of the worst atrocities in human history. The important part of this series is not what happens, but how it happens. And Ruocchio shows you that even if the reader knows what is eventually to come, that does not mean he cannot surprise you and keep you on the edge of your seat along the way. The character of Hadrian Marleau is central and fundamental to this series. We see the empire and world through his eyes, focus on what is deemed important by him, and are therefore often stuck in his biases. Hadrian also writes as if he is writing to someone in his world, someone who knows of Hadrian half-mortal, who committed such a heinous crime. So he will focus on details we would not ask about, and argue on subjects we may lack an opinion on. Ultimately though, what makes Hadrian one of my favorite characters is not necessarily what his personality is at any one time, but how he changes over centuries of life and conflict. Often, narrator Hadrian feels like a different character than current Hadrian, as extremely self-critical, although the ways in which he differs from current Hadrian massively change throughout the epic. Ultimately, what Sun Eater's greatest asset on this list was consistency. With, unlike The Rage of Dragons, which only had 2 books, we have 5 Sun Eater novels at this point, and I have a minimum score for this series at 9 of 10, which is one of the highest of any of the series on here, and it has one of the highest average ratings of any series I have on this list, or the other list. As I say this, there are 5 entries of what will be 7, and 4 of them have had a high enough score to make my top 10 book list at the end of the year, with half of those not making it because they lost out to another Sun Eater novel. Each book has a slightly different flavor, whether it is the coming of age of Empire of Silence, the gothic horror of Howling Dark, or the political thriller and war novel in Demon in White. They continue to not miss. What holds this series back from being even higher is that while I absolutely love Demon in White, and it was one of my favorite books of the year I read it, it has not quite hit the highs of me of some of the series I have above it. It has a max score of 9.5, which is exceptional, but tied for 8th among the highest max scores of any of the series I have, compared to its average score, which is solo 4th of all series. That includes incomplete and complete series. Same thing for its report card, as I give Sun Eater near straight A's, but it rarely grabs an A+, although it does grab one in prose, but then gets A's in setting, plotting, and theme. The setting is sprawling, unique, and feels believable while maintaining wonder. The series contains one of the 4 best-paced, really long novels I've ever read in Demon in White, which pacing-wise is up there with A Storm of Swords, Words of Radiance, and The Wall of Storms. And the series explains such a broad range of themes that I could not do them all justice in a short video. And it does it in a thought-provoking way while still coming from the source of Hadrian Marlowe. Despite Hadrian being one of my favorite characters ever, I did drop characters to a B+, which is obviously still very good, but I feel that especially for the first 2 books, the supporting cast is a slight relatively weakness. This gives the Sun Eater a GPA of 3.73, which is 7th of all the series on either list, so just above the middle of the pack. The prose of this series stands out to me especially. Since book 2, I do not believe I've had to reread a descriptive passage because I could picture everything so vividly. Sun Eater is full of incredibly unique settings, and I really can see all of them in my head as I read, and I just find it incredibly elegant and readable and vivid. Every time I return to it, I'm once again surprised by how good it is, because it's hard to truly remember. The style is unique and distinct without sacrificing clarity. Basically, Sun Eater, in my opinion, is good at pretty much everything. It rides the line of being page-turning and simply badass, while also being thought-provoking and having depth, and as a result, it pretty comfortably earns the number 3 spot on my list. This is, without a doubt, the series I have thought about the most. Throughout my life, if you find me while I am picturing a scene or thinking about a book I have read, the chances are good that it is from The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. It seems like a very random series to have that title. Mystery action adventures following a really sarcastic, sometimes cringy wizard named Harry Dresden solve cases in the city of Chicago. It sounds like it has a ceiling of being stupid fun and a floor of being cringy nonsense. However, instead it contains one of my favorite characters in fiction, the single book I have reread the most times, the book-related subreddit I have spent the most time on, and my channel has more spoiler content for this series than every other series combined. Like the Sun Eater, this is a first-person story, and like the Sun Eater, everything goes through Harry. Reading Jim Butcher's other work can almost be jarring to some people, as it lacks the specific, carefully crafted voice of Harry Dresden behind every piece of information we get and every scene we see. Harry Dresden is very simply the character in fiction that I know best. In his narration, he does not hold back. Almost all the time, he lets us see into the very depth of his soul. I have followed him for 15 years of his life, and at this point 10 years of my life, and I have watched that stupid, wonderful character grow in so many ways. Dresden Files also excels in its supporting cast, with every single one being a well-fleshed out, complex, multifaceted character with brilliantly done relationships with our protagonist Harry Dresden and other characters. Jim Butcher has the ability to change what the reader's opinion on a character is drastically, without actually having them change in a significant way. We simply change our opinion as Harry changes his opinion and his relationship with that character changes. Also, with his side and main cast, Jim Butcher has mastered making the passage of time feel real. When we run into someone that has not taken stage in years, they feel like years worth of events, triumphs, and failures has happened for them. As a result, for me, The Dresden Files earns one of the 2 A+ in characters that I am going to give out. In all transparency, I will say I am not averaging out how good the characters are for the entire series, and for the report card, I'm grading it as it is for most of the series. And in fact, while Dresden Files has some pretty pedestrian book-by-book scores relative to the other 4 series on this top 5 list, and the other 10 on the top 10 list, with the lowest median, mean 25th percentile, and second lowest 75th percentile of any book of any series in this top 5. When I go by the skills, I gave the Dresden Files straight A's. Jim Butcher has a more straightforward writing style, and it is, in my opinion, that by the time he gets to the heart of the series, he executes a relatively straightforward writing style better than anyone else I have ever read. The vernacular feels just right because it fits Harry and it is so smooth, so clear, so hard-hitting, and only when it should be, it is beautiful. As I said, I think more about this series than any other, and I truly believe that if I had never read this series, or even if it was a smaller part of my life, I would be a worse person in terms of like the moral decisions I make. The world is Chicago, but it is also sprawling and deep. If there's a figure in mythology, it is somewhere in the Dresden Files. And Jim Butcher's ability to choose the best possible interpretation of various mythological figures to fit the world continues to astound me to this day. The plots are tight, the foreshadowing is genius, and the various subplots for each book and the overarching multiple book plots are handled with brilliance. And finally, the action is tense, thrilling, plausible, except for the magic, and immersive. Jim Butcher was not good at all these things when he started my career. My opinion, he wasn't excellent at any of them. Perhaps his best skill, by far, is not any specific ability. It is the ability to constantly improve to an outrageous degree. Many authors have started with an uneven skill set and polished those weaknesses. Jim Butcher, when he broke out, simply does not stand out at any individual skill, and now he stands out in all of them. Somehow, no matter how good he gets, he still gets better. Battleground was not my favorite Dresden novel. Using that expression literally, as I mean it's my second favorite. However, that is not due to craft. I believe it is the most impressive, and that the Jim Butcher who wrote it was clearly a more skilled author than the Jim Butcher who wrote any previous books. Just wait until you get to changes. Sometimes your favorite thing gets to be unique. Some small, niche piece of media, location, or band. Alas, not this time. Because sometimes you have a basic opinion, and here is mine. My favorite incomplete series, by far, is the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. The very simple reason is that Oathbringer is my least favorite of the 4 novels, and of the 4 series I have mentioned before this, there is exactly one novel I'm sure I like more than Oathbringer in all of them combined, and one more that's a coin flip, and one more that I could maybe end up liking more in the future. The series in this list are made up of 32 novels, and my top 5 favorite novels of these 32 contain all 4 written books in this series. When I read The Way of Kings, it became my favorite book of all time, and it held that spot for the few days it took me to read Words of Radiance, because that then became my new favorite book of all time, all the way back in 2015. Since then, I have read The Way of Kings 6 more times, Words of Radiance as well, Oathbringer 4 times, and Rhythm of War in 34 hours on release day. I would like to warn you, if you dislike the Stormlight Archive, if you think it's mid that it has succeeded through timing, marketing, and luck, and not due to quality, the following few minutes are gonna annoy you. If I look at the grades I would give the series for each individual skill, it already looks like one of my favorite series ever. But when I look at the book-by-book scores, it reveals what I believe is truly Brandon's greatest skill, and that is that I believe these books are greater than the sum of their parts. Roshar is one of the most well-fleshed out, vibrant, and unique worlds I've ever had the pleasure to read about. The plotting and setup and payoff is truly next level. Details that may seem irrelevant become crucial, and time again, Brandon shows that when you thought he was accomplishing one thing with a scene, he was actually accomplishing 4. The curtain gets pulled back, and time again, the truth becomes obvious to me, and I wonder how I missed it. And yet I also know that I will miss it again and again as the pieces begin to fit together. People often disdain the prose of these novels, and yet I can say that every time I reread them, I find that for me, they are the most immersive novels I have read. Time blurs into the background as the real world fades, and I see Roshar and Kaladin in my mind's eye. Every single Stormlight book, every single time, every single chapter. It is the only series that if you interrupted me as I was reading and asked me what page I was on, I would have to go back and check, because as the minutes fade to hours, I forget that I am reading page by page, as I'm only aware of the story the characters and the world. I don't have time to admire the sentence structure, because sentence structure is separate from the story, and that is all I'm aware of when I am reading the Stormlight Archive. So I think the individual parts are incredible, truly top tier, and yet the resulting novels are greater than them. Plot serves character, character serves theme. Some people out there seem to act like it is some coincidence that this man has dominated the genre for a decade, or if it isn't a coincidence, it has to do with his ability at marketing, an ability to judge the market, and not his writing and storytelling ability. You do not become millions of people's favorite author by collecting bottle caps. Someone could likely become an author that many people kind of like, but few love in that way. But you do not have millions of obsessive fans who reread your 1,200 page novels 8 times because you're good at marketing and understanding the market. And if you are someone out there that honestly believes that a 10-book series full of relatively slow-paced 400,000 word novels with multiple prologues, random, seemingly completely disconnected interludes, and a steep world-building curve is the result of someone going out there and trying to write novels based on commercial viability and not writing the stories they want to tell, I honestly do not know how I can explain to you how ridiculous that is. Among all series I have read, complete or incomplete, Stormlight has the highest mean rating by far, which is an average rating that only 3 other authors have had in any books, and one of those was actually co-written by Brandon Sanderson. What's up, The Gathering Storm? It has a maximum rating of 9.9, which is 3rd, and a minimum rating of 9.6, which means my least favorite Stormlight book is 9.6, which is 1st by a huge margin. It has a 33rd percentile of 9.65, which is again 1st by far, and a 75th percentile of 9.85, which is tied for 1st. Every time I don't read a Stormlight book, I slowly start to wonder if maybe I won't enjoy it as much. People say that it doesn't hold up to the true titans of the genre in terms of quality. And then I reread it, and like clockwork, my mind is blown again. The Stormlight Archive is quality, and like many people out there, it is my favorite ongoing series of all time.